It began on a quiet morning inside Kensington Palace, a morning that looked no different from any other. The sky was gray, the halls were calm, and the daily routine of palace life moved forward without pause. Kate Middleton had just finished reviewing her schedule for the day when she noticed something unusual among her mail. Resting between official documents and polite invitations was a plain white envelope. It did not carry the royal crest. It did not come through the usual channels. It looked ordinary, yet something about it felt heavy, as if it carried more weight than paper ever should. Kate picked it up slowly. The wax seal was dark and unfamiliar, and the handwriting on the front was careful but distant, with no warmth or ceremony. For a moment, she considered setting it aside, thinking it might be a mistake. But a strange feeling settled in her chest, a quiet sense of unease that told her this envelope was not an accident. After a long pause, she broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The document was short, written in simple, clinical language. At the top were the words, "Confidential DNA report." Kate felt her breath slow as she read further. Her eyes moved over names she knew all too well, including one that instantly brought a tight ache to her chest. Diana, Princess of Wales. The other name meant nothing to her at first, but the more she read, the more that name seemed to demand her attention. The conclusion was clear and impossible to misunderstand. The test confirmed a biological connection that should not exist, at least not according to everything the world believed. Kate's hands began to shake. She read the page again, hoping she had misunderstood, but the words did not change. This was not gossip or rumor. It was scientific proof. She lowered herself into a chair, pressing the paper against her chest, as tears filled her eyes. This was not just a secret. It was a truth powerful enough to change everything. As Kate sat in silence, memories began to rise from places she had long ignored. She thought of Diana, not as the icon the world remembered, but as the woman described in private letters and whispered stories. Diana had always spoken carefully, choosing words that hinted rather than explained. There were moments in old interviews where she paused, as if deciding how much truth was safe to share. Kate remembered seeing excerpts from Diana's diaries years ago, words that had once seemed emotional but unclear. Now they felt different. One line echoed in her mind again and again. "One day, she will understand." At the time, Kate had assumed Diana meant the weight of royal life. Now she wondered if Diana had been preparing someone to uncover a truth she herself could never reveal. The palace around Kate felt different now. The walls seemed closer, the silence louder. She could hear her children laughing down the hall, innocent and unaware, and the sound made her heart ache. How many people had lived inside this system without knowing the full truth? How many had suspected something but chosen silence? Kate thought back on years of careful behavior, of smiling when required, of staying quiet when questions felt dangerous. She realized that this secret had likely shaped decisions long before she ever entered the royal family. The monarchy's perfect image suddenly felt fragile, built not just on tradition, but on carefully hidden truths. As the shock settled, determination began to replace fear. Kate knew this document could not stand alone. If the truth existed, there had to be more evidence. Diana had never been careless. If she had known, she would have left something behind. That thought led Kate to one place above all others: Althorpe, Diana's family home. It was there, among Diana's personal belongings, that answers might still be waiting. Kate folded the report carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Whatever this truth was, it had chosen her for a reason, and she could no longer look away. Kate arrived at Althorpe quietly, without ceremony or announcement. To the outside world, it was a private visit meant for reflection. But inside her heart, it was something else entirely. The estate felt heavy with memory. Every hallway, every room seemed to carry echoes of Diana's presence. With the help of a long-time housekeeper who had served the Spencer family for decades, Kate was led to a small, hidden room few people ever entered. The air inside was cold and still, as if time itself had paused there. Boxes lined the walls, labeled carefully in Diana's handwriting. One in particular caught Kate's eye. On its lid were the words, "For Catherine, when the time is right." Inside were letters, photographs, and notes written in a hurried hand. Diana's voice came alive through the pages, filled with fear, frustration, and quiet strength. She wrote of meetings held in secret, of people she trusted, and others she feared. Among the papers were photographs of a man Kate had never seen before. His face was striking, familiar in a way that made Kate's heart pound. There was something in his eyes, something that reminded her painfully of someone she knew. Beneath the photographs lay another envelope. Inside were early DNA results, incomplete but suggestive. Diana had known. She had been searching for proof long before her death. The resemblance in the photographs was impossible to ignore. The man's features mirrored those of Prince Harry in ways that felt deeply unsettling. Kate's thoughts raced. Could this be the source of the long-standing rumors? Could this man be more than a shadow in Diana's past? As Kate continued reading, the truth became clearer. Records of the man's birth had been altered. Entire chapters of his life had been erased. Someone had worked very hard to make sure the world never learned his name. Kate knew she could not face this alone. She returned to London and confronted Charles. The meeting was quiet, tense, and heavy with unspoken history. At first, Charles dismissed the evidence, calling it speculation and misunderstanding. But as Kate read aloud from Diana's letters, something in him shifted. His composure cracked, just enough to reveal the truth beneath. He admitted that he had known. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to stay silent. Enough to protect the crown at any cost. He spoke of duty, of responsibility, of preserving the institution. To Kate, his words felt cold and hollow. Diana had suffered, and everyone had known, yet no one had spoken. When Kate showed the evidence to William, the reaction was different. He was not angry at first. As he read the report, memories flooded back. His mother's sadness, her warnings, her pain. He thought of Harry, of the distance between them, of questions that had never been answered. The truth shook him deeply. He struggled with what it meant, not just for the monarchy, but for his family. He was torn between loyalty and honesty, between duty and justice. Kate reminded him of Diana's courage, of the trail she had left behind. She told him silence had already cost too much. But before William could decide what to do, Camilla intervened. She approached Kate calmly, with a confidence born of survival. She admitted she had known parts of the truth for years. She explained how silence had been her shield, how knowing when to stay quiet had kept her safe. Then she warned Kate, if the truth came out, it would destroy everything. Not just the monarchy, but Kate herself. Stories would surface, reputations would be ruined, families would suffer. Camilla's words were not shouted. They were whispered, and that made them far more dangerous. That night, Kate lay awake, staring into the darkness. She thought of Diana. She thought of her children. She thought of the weight of silence and the cost of truth. She knew that whatever she chose next would change history. But she also knew that some truths demand to be spoken, no matter the price. At dawn, Kate made her decision. She would go public, not out of anger or revenge, but out of respect for the woman who had been silenced. she arranged a press gathering outside Kensington Palace, breaking every rule of royal tradition. When she stepped before the cameras, the world fell silent. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear. She told Diana's story not as a legend, but as a human life shaped by fear and courage. She spoke of secrets buried in the name of duty and of the cost of silence. Then she revealed the DNA evidence. She confirmed what had been hidden for decades. Diana had a son the world had never known. The reaction was immediate. Shock spread across the crowd. Within minutes, the story reached every corner of the globe. Some were outraged. Others were heartbroken. Many felt a deep sense of sympathy for Diana and the child she had been forced to hide. Inside the palace, chaos followed. Carefully controlled images shattered. Long-held alliances strained. William stood by Kate's side, his expression filled with pain and resolve. Charles remained silent, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. Camilla watched from a distance, her face unreadable. Then the man himself appeared. Diana's hidden son stepped into the light. He spoke calmly, without anger or bitterness. He named Diana as his mother without apology. He thanked Kate for her courage. He said he had lived in silence to protect the woman who gave him life. When asked if he would claim his place, he answered carefully. "Blood," he said, "cannot be erased." His words left the future uncertain, but undeniable. As the cameras faded, Kate stood quietly, her hand resting protectively over her children's future. Diana's story was no longer buried. It had become a turning point. The monarchy would survive, but it would never be the same. Truth had finally spoken. In the days that followed the public revelation, the world seemed to move faster than ever before. News channels ran the story without pause. Social media overflowed with opinions, and newspapers printed bold headlines that questioned everything people thought they knew about the royal family. Some voices were angry, accusing the monarchy of deception and cruelty. Others were filled with sadness, mourning the life Diana might have lived if she had been allowed to speak freely. Many people, however, focused on Kate. They saw her not as a royal figure bound by rules, but as a woman who had made an impossible choice and stood by it. Messages of support poured in from across the world. Strangers wrote letters thanking her for her honesty, saying she had given a voice to a woman who had been silenced for too long. Kate read some of those messages late at night, when the palace finally grew quiet, and each one reminded her that she had not acted alone. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense and uncertain. Meetings were held behind closed doors, advisors whispered in corridors, and every decision felt heavy with consequence. The monarchy had always relied on stability, on the appearance of control, but now that control felt fragile. Charles spent long hours alone, reflecting on choices made years ago. The weight of regret pressed on him in ways he had never fully faced before. He thought of Diana not as a problem to be managed, but as a woman whose pain had been dismissed too easily. For the first time, he questioned whether protecting the institution had been worth the cost. Yet even as doubt crept in, he struggled to imagine a future where the monarchy could exist without secrets. William found himself caught between roles he had never wanted to separate. He was a son, a husband, a father, and a future king, all at once. The revelation forced him to confront memories he had buried since childhood. He thought of Diana's gentle strength, her laughter mixed with sadness, and the way she had looked at him as if trying to say something important without words. He also thought of Harry, his brother, whose life now felt even more complicated. Though the story had revealed a hidden truth, it did not erase years of shared experiences, love, and loss. William understood that whatever happened next, the bond between brothers would need honesty more than ever before. Harry, watching from afar, felt a storm of emotions he could barely name. Anger, Confusion, relief, and grief all collided within him. The revelation did not answer every question he had ever carried, but it explained the weight he had always felt, the sense of being slightly out of place. He reached out to William quietly, not for answers, but for understanding. Their conversation was not easy, but it was real. For the first time in years, they spoke without masks, acknowledging pain without blame. The truth had not healed everything, but it had opened a door they both knew needed to remain open. As for Diana's hidden son, his life changed overnight. For years, he had lived carefully, avoiding attention, protecting his privacy. Now the world knew his face, his story, and his connection to history. Yet he refused to be defined by titles or expectations. In interviews, he spoke calmly about his upbringing, about a mother who loved deeply, but feared constantly. He described Diana not as a princess, but as a woman who wanted safety for her child above all else. He made it clear that his goal was not to claim power, but to honor her truth. His quiet strength earned respect, even from those who initially doubted him. Kate watched all of this unfold with mixed emotions. She felt relief that the truth was finally free, but also sorrow for the pain it caused. She worried about her children and the world they would inherit. Would they grow up in a system that still relied on silence, or one willing to learn from its past? Late one evening, she walked through the palace gardens alone, thinking of Diana. She imagined what Diana might say if she were there. Perhaps she would smile sadly and say that truth always comes with a price, but that price is lighter than living a lie. Kate held on to that thought as she prepared for the days ahead. Slowly, changes began to take shape. The palace released carefully written statements acknowledging past mistakes, though they stopped short of full admissions. Public discussions about transparency and accountability grew louder. Historians revisited old events with fresh eyes. The monarchy did not fall, but it shifted. It became clear that the future could not look exactly like the past. Too much had been revealed, and too many people were watching closely now. In the end, what remained strongest was Diana's legacy. No longer frozen in tragedy alone, her story became one of courage and warning. She had seen the danger of silence and tried, in her own way, to fight it. Through Kate's actions, that fight reached the world at last. As time passed, the shock softened into reflection. People began to ask not just who Diana was, but what lessons her life offered. About power, about truth, about the cost of hiding who we are. For Kate, the journey did not end with the cameras turning away. It continued quietly, in choices made each day, in conversations held with honesty, and in the hope that her children would grow up in a world where truth was not something to fear. Standing at her window one final evening, she looked out at the city lights and felt a sense of calm she had not known before. Diana's final truth had found its voice, and though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Silence had finally been broken, and with it came the possibility of something new. After the first wave of shock passed, a deeper and quieter phase began. The world had heard the truth, but now it needed time to understand it. The palace gates remained closed to the public, yet the pressure outside only grew stronger. Every movement of the royal family was watched, every expression studied, every silence questioned. Kate felt this pressure daily. Wherever she went, cameras followed. Wherever she stood, people searched her face for regret or doubt. But what they saw instead was resolve. She did not speak often after the revelation, but when she did, her words were careful and sincere. She made it clear that her choice had never been about destroying the monarchy, but about freeing a truth that had been locked away for too long. Behind the palace walls, life became more complicated than ever before. Trust, once assumed, now had to be rebuilt, piece by piece. Advisors debated late into the night, trying to decide how much of the past should finally be acknowledged. Some argued that admitting mistakes would weaken the crown. Others believed honesty was the only way forward. The monarchy had always survived by adapting, and now adaptation was no longer optional. Kate was invited into these discussions more than before, not because of her title, but because of her courage. People listened to her differently now. She was no longer just following tradition. She was shaping it. William struggled in ways he had never shown publicly. The future he had been raised to accept suddenly looked uncertain. He loved his family, but he also felt the weight of his mother's pain more deeply than ever. In quiet moments, he revisited memories from childhood, moments that once confused him, but now made sense. He remembered Diana's eyes when she looked at him, full of love but also worry. He remembered how she had tried to teach him kindness, not just as a personal value, but as a responsibility. Slowly, William began to understand that being king one day might not mean protecting old rules at all costs, but protecting people from the harm those rules could cause. Harry, though still distant, felt something shift inside him. The truth did not rewrite his past, but it gave it meaning. He spoke privately with Diana's hidden son, not as rivals or strangers, but as men connected by the same woman and the same loss. Their conversation was quiet and respectful. There was no anger between them, only understanding. They shared stories of Diana that no one else knew, small moments of laughter and warmth that reminded them both of who she truly was. For the first time, Harry felt that the silence surrounding his mother had finally lifted. Diana's son remained careful with his words, but his presence alone changed everything. He did not seek power, yet his existence forced the monarchy to confront a truth it could never undo. People listened to him not because of his bloodline alone, but because of his honesty. He spoke about living without a name, without recognition, and without bitterness. He said that Diana had taught him one thing above all else, that truth matters, even when it is uncomfortable. His calm strength won respect from people who had once doubted him, and his refusal to demand anything from the crown made his voice even more powerful. As weeks passed, public emotion shifted from anger to reflection. People began to talk not just about the royal family, but about the cost of silence everywhere. Diana's story became part of a larger conversation about power, control, and the human price of image. Schools discussed her life in history classes. Writers revisited her words. Historians asked questions that had once been dismissed. The truth did not destroy the monarchy, but it forced it to grow. For Kate, the hardest moments came in private. At night, when the palace was still, she questioned herself. Had she done the right thing? Had she caused pain she could never undo? But then she thought of Diana, alone and unheard, and she knew silence would have been worse. She thought of her children and the world they would grow into. She wanted them to live in a future where truth was not something to fear, but something to face with courage. One evening, Kate returned to Althorpe alone. She walked the grounds slowly, feeling the history beneath her feet. Standing near the place where Diana rested, she whispered a quiet promise. The truth had been spoken. The silence had been broken. And whatever came next, it would be faced with honesty. The past could not be changed, but the future could still be shaped. As the sun set over the estate, Kate felt something she had not felt since the day the envelope arrived. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore.